pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Rob Miles will not be attending tonight. Something came up and he won't be able to be here. Carmen Matthews is virtual. So first item on the agenda this evening is public comments. So this would be the time to come forth and make a comment, preferably something that's not on the agenda, but either way. Any public comments this evening? Seeing none, we'll move on. We're going to review of upcoming City Council and URA Board action items. First one is going to be discussion regarding amendment of the Coos Bay Municipal Code, Title 17, Section whatever, vacation rentals. Carolyn, I'm sure this is you.
It is. Good evening.
And
Nice
you've
to
got
see
all the answers, right?
Yeah, I have a very brief PowerPoint as well.
Okay.
This topic has been under discussion for some time, and the council had asked the Planning Commission to hold some public hearings, which they did in October. The first one, they took about an hour, hour and a half of public testimony. The second meeting, they had about a half hour of public testimony, and they are planning to meet again on December 14th to wrap up their discussion. But I wanted to give you some feedback on kind of what they've been doing and hear your thoughts if there's some extra things you'd like them to check out. One of the things that you had asked of them was to look at what's going on in other communities. They looked at the communities of Warrenton, which is up by Astoria, Bandon and Coos County, which are local here, and North Bend as well. They recommended a number of changes, but they still need to reach a conclusion on a few things. They want to talk about and make a recommendation to you about an appropriate distance limit between vacation rental units. They want to talk about what kind of notification there should be to neighboring properties. And I have a feeling they're going to want to tie that to the distance factor. They want to talk about parking regulations related to things like boats and toy haulers and things like that. The last thing they wanted to talk about was violations and to kind of beef up the language in the draft related to the criteria and the language related to violations. There's a few things that they are not going to be weighing in on, but it was brought up to them by the public, and these are things that the council is probably going to want to look into. One was the cost of application fees and land use fees for vacation rentals. The other was how we're going to administer this. That's not a function of the Planning Commission. That's a function of staff. They also had a lot of questions, the public did, about how the Finance Department would administer the lodging tax requirements and identify rentals that have not been permitted or are not paying business license fees or lodging tax. And the Planning Commission was fairly clear it's not their job to weigh in on those things. So, but that will come up for you. To the next point on the next slide, what we did was we took a look at what they had recommended to you back in 2019, right before the pandemic hit, and they had made recommendations at that time. And what we did was we went back through those recommendations and looked at different ways to kind of tweak those to make them more palatable to the Commission for their future recommendation. On the next slide, under the purpose of an intent, I won't go through and read all of that, but they were fairly happy with what they had recommended to you before. There would be an impact on the administration of this, again, and we'll be talking to you more about that when you have your hearings later on. On the next slide, the applicability of these areas, they concluded that they wanted to keep them in residential areas, but they wanted to have some specific parameters of how they would operate. The strikeouts are reflective of the changes that were made to the zoning districts this last year. And then we did a pretty big overhaul. The next point was related to the authorization for residential structure, there's some verbiage that we really want the building official to weigh in on because of recent changes in the state building code requirements. And so this is probably not as finite as it should be, but we want to get her expertise in there. But I know we can get that to happen before we come back to the council. Some new standards that the commission wants. They want to see a requirement that if there's a joint access way to be used, that all the property owners that use that would have to agree to that as a part of the approval. They also want a finding, if it's approved, that the vacation rental would be compatible with the surrounding neighborhood. That sounds like a fairly simple thing, but we hadn't had it in the code, so in the draft. One of the impacts that there may be when it comes to administration on that is how do we assure all of these things that we would be requiring? We're going to have to put together a kind of a procedural sequence in-house between planning and building staff, and sometimes we may be pulling engineering staff as well. But generally, there's a lot more focus in this draft on inspections and making sure that we eyeball what's out there before things get rolling.
Carolyn, do we do current inspections now on vacation rentals?
We have, the way that it was, the code had been drafted, was that we would have a building inspection done by an outside inspector and then reviewed by the building official. And the more we looked at that, the more we decided that was not a good idea. We need to do that in-house.
Okay.
But it's going to need to happen before, before we go through the entire process. Somebody's going to need to go out and look, and then after and before they can actually occupy and get going as part of the business license. So it's going to be a multiple inspection situation, and we're going to have to look at identification, cost, and time value for staff.
Okay.
So who's planning on doing this work? I mean, this is going to put an extra burden on staff. I don't think our building department can handle this already.
Well, the building department is going through some shifting and changing, and I'm fairly confident that they can do this. We don't have people lined up out the door applying for these at this point in time. I think that ultimately we're going to have a conversation about if and when we when we find folks that are doing this illegally, how we want to handle that, and I think there'd probably be a little bit more of a boom at that time for us. But I think that's a discussion for another day. I think we feel fairly confident that we can pull this off between all of us.
Are we talking about inspecting on an annual basis?
Well, that's going to depend on how we work this out with the business licenses, and that's yet to be determined. So-
Because, Nicole, we had an idea of how many we had, right, at one time?
We have an idea of how many are reporting to us.
Correct, but I mean, we even went to regulate it. I think staff even went online and checked the Airbnbs, what were being advertised, and made sure they had a license or not.
Yes,
But
and
there's,
we haven't done that for a little bit of time. We do have that outside third party who's administering our TLT program right now, and that is part of that process for them. They just haven't started it yet.
Correct.
In the transition.
so how many did we have at whatever time?
I'm thinking we have about 15. Does that seem?
Yeah, it's
that's-
not a tremendous amount.
Yeah.
And
But we are suspecting there's more out there.
Mhm.
Okay.
Is anything being identified through the program that Janice was talking about in her presentation?
No, and they stopped that subscription because it wasn't there was no value to it.
Okay.
So she does get like a pinpoint in an area, and there are pictures, and sometimes those outside pictures help you identify the home. We did push that out to Public Works, the PD, and the fire to see if anyone had any, oh, that's a visual I can remember, but we haven't been able to identify those. And even then, we're still looking at 10 or 12 that are unknown, so we're not looking at a huge amount of these overall.
Okay.
And we don't necessarily see a correlation to people that maybe are here for 6 months and then want to rent out for 6 months. There's no way to really identify those unless they come forward.
Yes.
Yeah, but I mean, true. I mean, if we went through all the Airbnbs and were able to regulate and check it, because majority of them, I would imagine, are using some kind of, one of those to facilitate renting their places.
And that's what Janice's information showed, was they were using a third party to assist.
I mean, can we reach out to these and just say, you know, send us an annual or monthly address, or
They don't do that.
they won't do that?
Other cities have tried that too.
Yeah.
So is there any way that we
Is there any
not
legal?
allow them to operate these Airbnbs unless there's a regulation that they adhere to, or get a business license that says this is, you know, the criteria?
We can try, but there are other cities that actually have far more vacation rentals that have tried.
Yeah, I mean, I personally like to find a balance, but I mean, if there's no way to regulate it, you know, we could end up with something like in Lincoln County, right? But, and I hate to see that happen, because I think it could be a win-win for everyone, but it needs to be some oversight too.
Yeah, I do know that Airbnb and a couple of the other ones do collect from the people they represent, and then they remit to
Right.
us.
And we've, with our third-party local gov, we edited the information that we're collecting from our facilities so that they're supposed to be individually reporting to us, here's our gross rents, but Airbnb is paying for us, so I'm gonna exclude that from my calculation. That's coming along slowly, people are getting accustomed to that. And then as far as from the Airbnb or even Vacasa, those entities, part of the challenge for them to report to us the individual data is it's sometimes single taxpayer data they're giving us then, which would require a non-disclosure agreement signed by all parties who are going to see that, because we now know your personal tax information. So we have that right now with the state of Oregon when they collect our marijuana tax revenue. We have to sign a non-disclosure because those are tied to individuals who personally, if they do a Schedule C filing, we now know their personal tax information. So that's part of the challenge, I think, for some of these.
Sorry, Carolyn.
No, it's okay. Those are all very valid questions, and I know it's going to come up again, so. Some additional requirements, I think we talked about the building safety inspection report and how that would ultimately tie into the business license as well. Additional requirements beyond that, one of the commissioners definitely wanted to add a requirement that city noise regulations be a part of the menu of things that are noted on the site that folks have to comply with. She had experienced some noise problems with some of her tenants on her long-term rentals. A few others, the installation of the carbon monoxide and smoke detector. You have to have house numbers visible from the street. Seems like a small thing, but one of the commissioners brought that up from a safety standpoint.
So we're not getting business license at the moment from these Airbnbs or these vacation rentals?
For the ones that we're aware of, that have, yes,
They were getting business license?
yes.
Okay.
And they're paying their transient lodging tax as well. It just goes on, I think this was in your report, to talk about the annual verification of information for contact. And we'll have to figure out if we wrap that into the business license or if we have them do like a check-in on their land use permit. I think the devil will be in the details on the administration of that. Ultimately, folks are going to have to comply with all our municipal code requirements. There's going to be contact requirements that folks are able to, we're able to reach people 24/7 if there's a problem, and on-site advertising would be prohibited. The limit on occupants was kind of interesting. It was kind of all over the board when we looked at other communities, but I think what the commission settled on was to allow no more than 2 persons per bedroom plus 2 additional persons. And occupancy could also be determined by bedrooms, parking, and the overall floor plan, but what's ultimately authorized may be less than this example that we've given. if you notice, it says no more than. So there's some discrepancy there, not discrepancy, discretion there, that when we go out and inspect, we can, we can exercise our judgment on, boy, this doesn't have a closet, but there's 6 of them and they sure look like bedrooms to me. So as a community development team, we'll be looking at that. Again, the location limit, right now, the draft is written that vacation rentals need to be at least 300 feet apart from one another. Planning Commission's going to look at that on December 14th. They're also going to be talking about parking, which is number 10 on the next page. And then violations, how they want to handle that. In the underlined section, it identifies some violation ideas that they have that they're going to talk about again in December. Finally, there were some things that were somewhat related to this. One was the lack of what's called a homestay definition and standards. Many communities have what's called a homestay ordinance, where it's almost like an Airbnb, but it's really more like if you invited Uncle Joe to your house and he stayed for 3 weeks and you charged him rent. You're there, he's there. So, in that case, the individual probably doesn't have their own kitchen, they're just staying in a room, but it's less than 30 days. So under our lodging tax regulations, that would definitely be eligible for payment. The commission concluded that we could just use the vacation rental standards for this, and that's fine. The other thing that really kind of weighed on their mind was tying the distance that you have between vacation rentals and the distance for which you advertise this could happen when we put out the notices. Right now, our type 2 permits, which would be the land use permit process you'd go through, we notify people within 150 feet of the site. Well, if they expand that distance to beyond 300 feet, they're going to want a matching distance requirement. So that's all I have. If you have some information or something you'd like the commission to further consider as part of this discussion, I'd be happy to take it back to them when I prepare for their meeting on the 14th.
Carolyn, what was the concern about the advertising? I've seen, like in Lincoln County, actually, just very tasteful placards that say that they're a vacation rental. Was that from the public or from the
I don't
commission?
quite remember where that came from, but I remember the comment, something to the effect that, do we really want people advertising that this is being used for vacationers? For a lot of reasons, security, safety. But anyway, that's what they came up with.
I guess
Home resale, if somebody has a private residence, I would imagine that might be an issue.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point.
I guess I push back on that a little bit just if it were tasteful and it's just a plaque on the house, if there were requirements, it seems odd to me because I know it's a balance and we're trying to bring tourists in and we're trying to make sure that our citizens, we have housing and everything for the citizens, but I also think that if people are driving in the area, I can tell you I do it myself. I'll drive to Lincoln City and go, oh, I didn't know that was a rental. I'm going to check that one out next time because it's a really, it's a cool place. So I would hate to limit that, considering we're not talking about, at least currently, a lot of vacation rentals.
Well, I'll pass that on to the commission, that comment. Were there any others?
And
Yeah,
I was just going to say, I agree. Anything that I've seen has been very tasteful. The only time I've seen larger signage is if it was on 101 or something like that, but it was still always very tastefully done. But I don't know signage-wise if that's speech, and then we get into,
Well, no, you can
Another-
have sign requirements, you just can't regulate the speech.
okay.
I guess I should let you chime in.
I think you're right.
Drew?
I'm upside down on the zoning. I don't agree with it being in dedicated residential. Mixed use is okay with me, but the Lincoln City topic is a good example. Before I knew Orca was opening, I had applied for city manager up there and got into the finals. And when I was looking around and talking to people up there, there was a consistent message that their housing market, it was worse than here, for one. I mean, I was looking at it if I could even make that move. But about a third of their housing market had turned into second homes, so not much to do with that, just seasonal folks. A third of it had turned into vacation rentals, and there was only a third of it left for people that actually lived there. I was hearing about people staying in RVs for a year, 2 years while they try and locate housing there. So I don't agree with sticking this on dedicated residential. Mixed use, okay. Commercial, okay, but not dedicated residential. It may be small now, but it can escalate, and I don't want us to be in that position.
Well, first of all, Lincoln County is the only one that did it, so it's unincorporated areas, not the Lincoln City itself.
It was Lincoln City. I talked to the people up.
No, I'm saying that it passed this new ordinance, correct? Yeah.
So again,
The ordinance would just pass, or the issue that was passed was
There's a
unincorporated
ballot
areas. for
measure
Lincoln
that
County.
just got passed up in Lincoln County
Right.
to actually phase out vacation rentals. But the premise on that one was about health and safety, and the fact that many of those were hooked up to septic systems.
Right. But just in the county, it wasn't the city,
Just,
correct?
yeah, out in the county.
Right. So, and the other thing,
I'm sorry, so that was based on septic systems? Is that what you said, Roger?
That's my understanding, and it's a phased approach. It's not to stop any new ones. It's actually to phase them all out over a period of time.
Okay, thank you.
and I think that we need to be somewhat conscious of, the situation. Now, I understand the new building regulations on this type of operation has changed drastically, and it's going to be very expensive if you're going to make it a vacation rental. So the same criteria doesn't exist except for the existing ones we have now. Anything new coming online, it's going to be a little bit different, quite a bit different, to be able to have a facility to rent out. Am I right?
if
Correct.
folks can make money, they'll spend money. That's,
Well, no, the vacation rental, but I mean, you're gonna have, you have sprinkler systems, all that kind of thing, so. I mean, I don't know, I mean, I guess it's a discussion we're gonna have to have. I'm not sure, I guess we could have it now. I mean, does the council wanna, we're at the point of a working session, but I mean, do we want to eliminate any vacation rentals and put a stop on it? I mean, I think we have to grandfather the ones in that are there.
I'm not saying to stop them, just not dedicate them into residential. Mixed use, commercial, I'm not opposed to them existing, but I don't want them to take up dedicated housing.
So, and at this time, they can.
I guess, and I'm from the point of view that because we have been working so diligently, right, on new housing starts in this community, that I think that there's still some opportunity for residential. I don't know what the magic number is though, Drew. I get your point of, wanting to be conscientious about that, so that's where I sit.
We need more than 600 units in the next 10 to 20 years, is where the number was.
Yeah, but right now, Drew, if we can maintain and move forward, right now we have over 400. It'll be coming online in what time frame? If everything moves forward the way it should be.
And that operates under the assumption none of them become vacation rentals, though.
Well,
Possibility?
I have a hard time not chiming in. I am right down the middle. I think we have to be very cautious that we aren't reaching into somebody else's business. I think people have a right to do with their property, to a certain degree, as long as it meets the guidelines of the coding and everything else. I don't think we can sit here and tell someone, you can't do this because we need this.
I can understand that, but the entire premise of zoning is that we're telling people what they can do in a specific area in the best interest of the people of the city.
But our zoning currently says you can have them in residential areas.
Yeah.
Yeah, zoning changes.
Mayor, Carmen has his hand up.
Yes, Carmen.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to chime in on a lot of this, and I guess just to speak to Stephanie's point, I agree to some extent, but I'm also really worried about this housing stock, and I think that in terms of letting people just do whatever they want with any of the properties doesn't quite fit the goals we've set as a council to make sure that we have housing for our residents. I'm a little bit worried about that. So one question I had was, what is the purpose of having distancing between rental properties of 300 feet? Is that, I mean, so that we have families in between rental properties? I don't know. Clusters of rental properties wouldn't be a bad idea, in my opinion, if that's what somebody wanted to build.
What I see universally in most communities is that they do have a distance so that there aren't those clusters and there's not an overrun of a whole neighborhood for that particular kind of use. It's kind of interesting because what happens is folks that come and go, they just become because it's a residential area that's full-time, they're a little bit more invisible because there's not a lot of them bunched together. Some communities go even farther, 500 feet, 1,000 feet. With the Planning Commission, I had an exhibit for them that showed them what that would look like, but that's still yet to be discussed.
Okay. Well, that I'm just looking for clarification. That does make sense. Another question, I saw that in part of the licensing or requirements for a short-term vacation rental, they had to be deemed able to fit within a neighborhood. And I didn't quite get how you would quantify how a vacation rental would fit in a neighborhood. So it seems pretty vague.
Well, I think that would be somewhat subjective. Many codes, for a lot of things, really kind of lend themselves to just your judgment on the ground when you're looking at a situation, and this would be one of them. I mean, I can think of some kind of crazy examples. If you have you have a neighborhood of little 2-bedroom, 1-bath bungalows, and someone decides they want to build a 6-bedroom house in that neighborhood and turn it into a vacation rental. Well, maybe that's not really within the context of that neighborhood. I'm just throwing that out as an example.
Yeah.
So, it's kind of one of those, use your judgment and leave that to your director who's ultimately responsible for the program. And of course, these decisions can all be appealed. If I could make one more point, and I brought up the idea of the homestay. A lot of the objections we were hearing from Joe Citizen here was that, you have all these strangers coming in and out of the neighborhood, and that was not desirable for many of these folks. And with the homestay situation, it would be you as a neighborhood resident would still be in the home, and folks would be in the home with you. Therefore, I think the concern about, being a good visitor might be lessened somewhat if there was a sense that somebody who lived in the house was there during the stay. So I'm going to talk some more to the Planning Commission about kind of rethinking the homestay idea, because it does not, it kind of speaks to Councilor Farmer's point as well. That would provide some versatility to the use of a home. But I think they could flesh that out a little more if there was council interest. So
are you suggesting they would do this for all vacation rentals?
No, I'm saying throw that out as an option for them to think about. Ultimately, they'll make a recommendation to you, but I think that it's a good thing to have on the menu of things to consider.
So you'd be talking about homestays and vacation rentals?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I don't mind homestays because at least one of our residents is living there.
Okay.
I guess from my perspective, I just feel like, again, I'm coming from the tourism angle, is when I go to a community, I will spend gas, groceries, the whole 9 yards if I'm staying in one of these vacation rentals. And I'm probably going to spend more in the community than I would if I'm staying in a hotel. And so we don't dictate if you can have a second home. So I feel like vacation rentals are the exact same thing. I think if I think we need to have a balance. So I think we need to pick a number, and I have no idea what the number is. And then we say, no more vacation rentals. You're saying there's 15 now. If you were to guess how many are out there, how many additional vacation rentals aren't paying, what would that number be in Coos Bay?
I mean, I would be shocked if we're looking at more than 40. I mean,
In total 40
Yeah.
plus the 15?
in
or just-
looking at what Janice's data kind of pulled up, which we couldn't pinpoint, yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind putting some balance on it, and maybe it's a good idea what Lucinda brought up, but I don't think we should put a flat number on it. Maybe we should put a percentage of the housing we have.
There
So,
you
because
go.
as it expands, then you can expand it. And also, the biggest problem with our housing, truthfully, is we don't have an urban growth boundary. We sit here, we need to have, I know developers that would love to build homes. They have nowhere to build them. How many people have you gotten, Roger, that have talked about building and their property's not available to build? I mean, that's our problem. It's not because of vacation rentals that we're having a problem. Now, there's some people that are upset because the vacation rentals are in their neighborhood, and I understand that, and I think there needs to be some regulation. But we're not at a point where these vacation rentals are impacting our housing. And I think that, what's impacting our housing, we have no developable lands to build. I mean, I talk to Adam Rethra on a regular basis, and he just did, 35 or 40 lots out in Empire, and he wants to build 60 or 70 units out there. And he's looking at more locations and has more developers, but there's not any developable property for housing.
Well,
That's our issue.
How many single-family homes do we have in the city limits?
I feel like Drew knows that number from that housing study. Do you remember that number, Drew?
No, but I can say to the point of zoning and restrictions on property, you're not actually allowed to zone for single-family homes anymore. Housing laws have changed drastically, so
Well, I'm
homeowners
just
zoning
saying,
have already
if we're
changed on them.
talking a max of 40,
I wouldn't.
that is
uh,
a very small percentage of our housing. I don't think that there's gonna be a glut of folks, burning down the door to turn that. I think they're looking, people that are maybe not living in the home, but are renting it to somebody who's living and working here.
If the number's that small, the developments could fit in mixed use. I'm looking farther down the road than where we're at right now or what this council might do. We
Yeah.
can say 40 and the next council says no limit.
But I
And
think
then
you're
the
right.
growth goes nuts.
No, I think you're burdened.
You're
I mean,
right.
I don't disagree with that. I also think that, we don't, again, need to get in people's business, but I don't know where these houses currently are, but you're gonna get rid of probably, I hate using this word, let me see if I can do this. If you
Diplomatically.
Exactly, if you have the price point high enough, right, you're not gonna have people who are damaging the house, making a lot of noise, the parking issues. I think there's ways to control that.
Yeah, and I
Having
think,
been around Lake Tahoe, I'm not so sure. We're not Lake Tahoe, but
Yeah.
yeah.
well, I think if
Is
you,
it possible to see a map, to generate a map that would show us where these are located?
We could probably work with Micah, the ones that we know are out there, and get those on our GIS.
Okay, just so we can
Well,
kind
to
of see.
Carolyn's point, they were talking about districts, would this serve well?
Yeah,
If we limited
district's
the
fine.
number of vacation rentals in districts?
I would still be inclined towards mixed use or above. And I understand short-term
You
rentals
always
are nice.
Flexible. What's going on?
What's
with
that?
you? You're always flexible. What's going on with you?
I understand short-term rentals are nice and people spend money in them, but if you're staying in a short-term rental, you're staying in what could be someone's home. It could be a local's home.
but at the
A
same,
third of Lincoln City has lost its homes.
I don't want to become Lincoln City, and I think that if you put a percentage on the housing, that would regulate the numbers. But a home would be, what you're talking about would be no different if a person had a second home sitting there empty. It's going to do the same thing, and a lot of people do that anyway. And we can't control that, Drew. So I understand what you're saying, and everyone has a right to have a second home and sit there empty, and it would still take away some housing livability for somebody, and I understand that. And I think these short-term rentals, same thing, it could be a possibility, but I think that we need to focus on development of property and keep the percentages. And a council, future council can come in, no matter what we do here, they can change it. So we can't dictate to the future council.
I can't. I don't see it as one or the other, though. I mean, it's gonna take a lot of time to expand the urban growth boundary. In Oregon, you have to go through the legislature
We
to
have-
do it, and they already denied it once for
We have
us a year
property,
ago.
we have property right now in our city that could be developed if we could get it to happen.
We have property right now in the city that's sitting empty because developers won't develop it off the end of Elrod. You can take property, people buy it, and you can still not get development.
True, but yeah, I mean, those are the things, there's gotta be some incentives, and there's other properties that are available that could be developed, that we're talking about. But urban growth boundary is something that we need to start moving on, and I'm not sure how long is it gonna take us to go through this process, Carol?
We're going to start, actually, I just connected with them today. I think we'll have our first advisory committee meeting in February, March, and I'm hoping that we'll be finished by July, looking at the boundary area and updating the HNA.
Roger, were you gonna say something?
Well, I was just going to say there are different ways to limit the number of vacation rentals in your area. Bandon does it by, they issue no more permits than a certain number. And so for a new one to come in, one has to go out. That's one way. I think that's difficult. I think it's difficult to say we're going to do it by percentage. I think the easiest way to limit them is to do distancing. You just say you can't have any more within a certain distance of another one. It's self-limiting all by itself. And it's easier for staff, in my opinion, to manage.
Yes, that's true.
Can I ask a question about the ADUs? So
Sure.
an ADU cannot be a vacation rental.
Currently, no, they cannot.
Ooh.
I mean, that seems like an opportunity there. I mean, similar to the homestay where an owner is on the property, it seems like that is something that could be an opportunity for homeowners to, and tourists, while not necessarily taking some of our housing stock.
That's a very good point. I think that when the ADU regulation, this is just Carolyn's opinion, when those regulations were adopted by the legislature, the idea was to have folks in homes long-term. And that causes a little bit of a heartburn, because if Joe homeowner wants to leave it empty, then we can leave it empty. So that's where the vacation rental idea might come in handy. That's a tough one.
I mean, I think that's what we see in Portland
Yeah,
with their regulations.
right.
I also want to say, Carolyn, I watched both of the planning commission meetings and just appreciate you and
Oh, thank you.
the planning commission and the citizens that came forth. There were some
Yeah.
interesting conversations.
Yeah, the planning commission has, they should make you proud. They've been doing a very good job with this topic. Well, I think I have a lot of good comments to take back to them.
Back to urban growth boundary. Okay, you said the first hearing's gonna be in March. How long do you think this process is gonna take?
Well, we'd like to wrap it up by July 2022,
Okay.
which is not really that far. We had a second grant for another housing type product, and we're going to hold that off until this is done, that's done.
Okay.
So I think we're on target.
All
We're
right,
moving.
well, I just didn't know, we're looking at a year, 2 years, 3
Nope.
years?
Well, this is November, so
Okay,
8 months.
okay,
Yeah.
right.
Carolyn, if I remember correctly, the last housing study, when they came back, they said we had about 400 acres more than we needed to meet the housing stock they said we needed. And that was why they went against an urban growth boundary expansion. I'm probably overestimating the acreage.
I think that's stepping just a little further than where we're at, but I'm going to rely on the quick work of Jake Callister, who
Yeah.
knows this inside and out, to answer that at our first meeting, for sure.
In Oregon, unless you can demonstrate that need, they don't authorize it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think there's some property, Drew, for instance, I'll give you a perfect example, the property across from East Side. If it's not developable, if it's not available to develop, and then there's nothing we can do. And I think that is probably will go to the, helping us get this urban growth boundary. I mean, I think we're at a point that we can show that there's just not some property, as you mentioned, off Elrod's another one.
Well,
You got
that's
a
not,
developer up there.
the problem is because I tried to push to get the urban growth boundary to grow. The last study, they didn't even account for slope restrictions, so I at least got them to say anything over 20% didn't count. But the fact that the port won't develop that property does not make the state consider it undevelopable. So that property can sit empty as long as they want it to, And I don't have a good word for it, but it's not good for us. Property can be owned, exist, be empty, and the state will still say, well, you could develop that.
And I should probably clarify that I've had a recent conversation with the port, and we're making headway
On this,
That's good news.
on the property in East Side.
okay.
Well, I'd like to leave this topic on a high note. Your council and your planning commission spent a lot of time last year revising that development code to maximize the density opportunities. In some cases, it doubled. So if there's not any takers, it's not for lack of trying on your part. I've heard many comments from folks in the Oregon world of planning that I frequent from time to time say, I can't believe your city's willing to go that dense. And I'm like, yeah, they are. They want the housing. So I think it's an incentive that at some point is going to pay off. We just need to get on the map. So anyway, that's all I have unless there's questions.
Questions, anyone, for Carolyn? Nope. Thank you, good report. Good, yeah, dialogue, thank you. It's good to see you here, too. All right, let's see, next item. Discussion regarding amendment to the Coos Bay Municipal Code, Empire Waterfront Settlement Design Review. Carolyn? Well, you got all of them tonight, huh?
Yes, no, not all of them.
Couple of them, okay.
You've got your terrific engineering staff here. They're going to present in a little while on some other things. The council, you talked about this back in September, about the guidelines in Empire. And there was some discussion about repealing them and having the Planning Commission Design Assistance Team take a look at them. I wanted to kind of look at this kind of big picture. The development code that you have is really an extension of your comprehensive plan that lays out your vision for this community. And one of the things that code says is that you want to assure compatibility between new developments, existing uses, and future developments, and to promote land uses and development harmonious with their surroundings. Well, I don't need a violin because I think it speaks for itself. I think this is something that many communities want to achieve, and Coos Bay is right there with them. In addition to that, this council has always emphasized transparency as being very important. And so I'd like you to just tuck those two concepts in the back of your mind as we talk about this. The 1800s thematic ideas behind these, I'm going to hold them up just because I think they're amazingly long, 9 pages of guidelines. When these were developed at some point in years past, there was a community engagement that the council at that time decided warranted something this big and this detailed. However, as time has gone on, and from what research I've been able to locate, there's not been a lot that's been developed in the Empire area. And what has been developed that I've seen go through the DAT in the last 3 years, they haven't come back with 1800s historical context. Not that that's not good. It's just not what people are wanting to do. So your council wanted the design assistance team and the planning commission to come back with some recommendations on this. And honestly, you gave this direction in September, and in October, the planning commission was tied up with vacation rental discussions. So they as a group have not sat down and looked at this together. But I did email all of them and say, hey, I'd like your feedback. This isn't official as a group, but I'd like to get some of your thoughts. So I'll talk about that in a minute, but I'd like to go back to the options that you talked about at your last meeting. One was to eliminate the guidelines totally. I mean, I think on the face of it, that's a very handy way to deal with this. It would be quick, it would be over, and you could move on. But the downside to not having any design guidelines at all is you're pretty much at the mercy of the development community. If they come in and they want to build something that you think is really ugly and really horrendous, if they meet the setbacks, the height, the lot coverage, the total building area, they're going to put in sewer, water, there's not a whole lot you can say, because you don't have a mechanism in place to guide them. And I'm certainly not an architect, and it's not, it can be very gray, but I think we all know we like what we like and we don't like what we don't like. We may not be able to articulate it, but that's kind of what design guidelines are about. And oftentimes you have a design assistance team style group with an architect on it that can kind of show you the way. This is what this looks like. This is what this means. And so I'd like you to really think about that. I don't think you want to give away your power. And I think that could be what would happen, but that would be up to you.
So does the rest of downtown Coos Bay, or the rest of Empire have restrictions or guidelines?
No, the waterfront has guidelines, and so does Hollering Place, and so does Empire. Those are your key areas.
But we've run into some issues on 101 down on Front Street because of this, and we've had to, anyway, there's been some problems. And I'm not sure, are we still upholding all those regulations and codes? I mean, those.
Yes. And the key word in guidelines is guide. You know, if you find something comes up that you believe stylistically works better for an area, and they don't suit the guidelines, you have every authority to say, no, we want to go in a different direction. You're not bound to them like you are a 5-foot side yard setback or a solid 35-foot height limit. There's room for you to work with.
I appreciate Carolyn's point, because driving through Empire is a gateway into Charleston and into all of our beaches. And so I think, I understand why they were originally put there. So I agree that we need to have some guidelines in place. I just don't know. I'm going to let Carolyn keep going, and maybe there's a recommendation for a happy medium that's still.
Sure.
But I think we've got to be very careful what the guidelines are. I believe, this is my philosophy, that these guidelines that we have set out in Empire have been a setback for Empire. They have not helped them. There are buildings out there, they're not being developed, nothing's happening because to do so, the guidelines are so difficult.
Do we have
They're not
proof
doing
of
it.
that?
So here we are. So guidelines, it's all in the perception.
But do we have proof of that, Mr. Mayor? Have we had developers say, nope, sorry, not going to develop in Empire?
Well, I don't know, but we have not, you heard just getting the mural, how difficult it was. And I was totally oblivious to how difficult it was, but there's just an example.
And look how we have these guidelines in Front Street, and yet we're still seeing a lot of development down there.
They're not as restrictive, I don't think. I don't even know, are they or not?
They are. But they're not as restrictive as what you have here in Empire.
In Empire, okay.
And just to the point on the mural, I really need to say for the record, the review on that did not have to be as difficult as it was. The applicant chose to submit the land use permit very late in the game, and we always try to accommodate up front, but there was a lag that I really don't want to attribute to my staff.
Okay.
So please just bear that in mind.
I think that Empire has a couple of issues, and this is one of them. But I think there are some other issues that Empire has. In fact, Roger and I just had a conversation about what is it going to take to really kickstart this. And I think it's just been, I've lived out there for, I don't know, almost 30 years now. But I grew up in downtown, not far from here. It's always been a little bit lag behind what was happening because this was the central business area and things like that. I think now we're seeing that potential. And I do think we have to have guidelines, but I don't think they need to be as restrictive, except in maybe some certain areas out there. Because I think Empire is coming into its own, and it's kind of like the new frontier of Coos Bay. And I don't think it's been thought of that way in the past.
I don't know. When was this urban renewal and these guidelines developed for Empire?
Oh, gosh.
It's been a number of years ago. It's probably about 20 years ago.
So we had a counselor sit right down there and tell us that we needed to do these guidelines to develop an urban renewal, otherwise he was not going to go forth. And so we did. And I'm just telling you, here we are. And we had the same discussion I'm hearing now. So I just want everyone to keep that in mind, that we need to make sure that we're flexible, because I'd like to see Empire develop and move
Exactly.
forward.
I agree with you.
Why
Mr.
would we
Mayor.
have different guidelines for Empire versus Front Street versus anywhere else?
Well, in my read of the code, those specific areas that I just mentioned were identified by the city, and it's even in the comp plan as well, as being very specialized niche areas that were very important. The downtown has been built out, pretty much built out for some time. There are no design guidelines for the downtown,
But there is for Front Street.
for Front Street and for Holland
And
Place.
why aren't, and so that's, why aren't the guidelines the same for Front Street as they are in Empire?
Well, I can take the Front Street one. The one for Front Street was designed to change that from an industrial area. And so, based off the Front Street master plan, a design district, after a lot of public input, was put together, and that zoning was changed to meet those desires and to achieve kind of a mixed-use area that wasn't just industrial, but still recognized some of the working waterfront. Empire was a little different, but I will say that, and I should share with you, that we hired a land use professional that's well recognized in the state, and is as professional as I believe and respected as Carolyn is, that went and looked at that for us. And what he shared, and he works all over the state, that's John Morgan, and John shared that there's two reasons. I mean, if you have a thriving area and you've got people that really want to get in there, you can set design standards, and you can make that community to look the way you want it. And he uses the example of Sisters. Sisters, you've got people fighting to get in there, and they have to adhere, and they will adhere. They'll pay the extra money, just like McDonald's adhere to their standards. He says, though, it doesn't work that way when you have an area that isn't experiencing development. Putting design standards actually inhibits development in that region. And he says, the stricter they are, the worse it is. And it was his recommendation a number of years ago that we revised those standards. And it came pretty close. I think it was a 4-3 vote to change it, and it just didn't pass. But this is probably the third time since I've been city manager that the design standards have come up in Empire.
I might have drank too much coffee tonight, but I'm gonna be a pain. I know one business down there that I pretty well encouraged to stay. They thought about pulling out because they were having such a headache down there. And I know a small scaler developer that avoids that part of town. They love doing business with Coos Bay. They don't want to touch that area.
And is that because of the design standards too?
Yeah, they don't want to deal with the problems.
The design standard problems or
Yeah,
other
they
problems?
not the crime. They actually have a couple businesses in Empire. They just recently bought some property, but they deliberately avoided that zone.
Okay.
There's the data, Mr. Mayor.
Well, I got
That's
another one, but
like pulled out of my
I don't
head.
think the one I was going to bring up would be applicable,
Huh?
you know, so it,
For sale sign, the building next to
Mark
Star Hope.
from Gary Athletic.
Bears.
Oh, yeah.
He's
No,
difficult.
no, here, it's next to that.
Well, to address that concern about things being too complex, we took a crack at coming up with some substantially modified standards. 2 pages. Substantially modified to think about. I did not bring along examples of what these things would look like. I can pull one out here. One of the goals of this is human scale massing. Refers to the perception of general shape, form, and size of a building, and its influence on a sense of place. And I'll give you an example. If somebody rolled in to Empire and they wanted to build a box made out of glass, all glass, and put it in there in that area next to your lovely historic light posts and a lot of the really charming little things you have there. If you have no guidelines in place, what are you going to tell them when they come to you with this? it's a tough nut to crack. I totally get Roger's comments. I get it. You want folks to come, but if they are going to come, are you going to be willing, without guidelines, to just accept anything they give you or they offer? So that's a question you should think about. But anyway, took a crack at redrafting these. Just for some thought, we also looked at the idea of really coming closer to a goal that you, as a council, had put together in your last goal-setting session about the hollering place, the Empire area. Your goal specifically was evaluate existing zoning, design standards, parking district, hollering place master plan, etc., as applied to the Empire area, and consider possible changes to encourage and incentivize investment, development, and redevelopment of the area. I think if you considered a revision to these guidelines as a way to incentivize, because it would clearly be easier, maybe this gentleman that Councilor Farmer mentioned, who doesn't want to do any work down there, it might be of interest to them. But more to the point, or in addition to the point, is to take a look at the boundaries of the area. Right now they run from Ocean Boulevard up to South Empire and Newmark. And I think there's a slide in here that identifies a map exhibit. I think it's the next one. It's hard to see there, but one of the things that you could consider would be to move that boundary and to move it away from Ocean Boulevard, where so much has already been developed in those storage units and wire fences and stuff. Move it to Shoneman, where it begins to soften into the district, and then take it all the way to the end of Newmark, to the Hollering Place area, and all the way down South Empire to the city limits. When the first time I drove into Coos Bay from the south, I mean, it was just amazing to me to see that whole street with all of those lovely lights, and it was in those little banners. It was very clear there was some vision, and in fact, it was one of the first things that was mentioned to me when I started here, was that this was going to be the next place. So I think that if you look at this holistically, there may be an opportunity here to fold into this goal that you developed. So that's something else to think about.
I appreciate that, Carolyn. I mean, I think I was the one who drove that request. I really wanted a master plan of the Empire. Maybe that's not the proper terminology for the city, but of what, to your point, of visioning what we really want it to become. I think we've done a great job with Front Street with that blue, that Front Street plan, and so my hope was we would do the same, apply the same principles to this area. So when we want to put a new business, when we want to put a library, when all those things, we actually have a vision of really how we want to grow this area or district.
And to your point, it almost feels like we're putting the cart before the horse.
That's exactly, thank you, Stephanie. I'm worried, the standards, I feel like we should do.
But I agree, we need to do something to loosen up, just like Mr. Mayor says, we've got a process that can be cumbersome, but at the same time,
Well,
visioning would be great.
Drew just got done telling you, here's a problem that we had some developers that just stayed away because they didn't want to have to deal with it. I think we need to be conscious of that. And Front Street, it still took time and the right developer to make it happen. Now it's finally happened. But there was some obstacles down there because of the same thing. So now we're moving along in that direction, and fortunately we found a developer that has been able to make that work. But it's been a hindrance also on Front Street. So, in my opinion.
If I could, to the point of master plans, the Front Street blueprint is now the tail end of a master plan process that started back in the 90s.
1996.
And having been in the planning world for a few great years, I've seen many times the enthusiasm for these master plans, for which you can spend $30,000, $40,000, $60,000, that if you do not wrap them into a capital improvement program that you have money for, they sit idle, and it's very sad. And if your city is struggling a little bit on capital projects, it's almost guaranteed to sit idle. So if you have an opportunity to take some baby steps that are not terribly intrusive, it's definitely worth thinking about because, like I said, they're guidelines. You've already established a framework for this area by the installation of all those public improvements, the work that you did at the Hollering Place, the vision that you had when you walked through that agreement with the tribes. I got to believe you still have a vision for that area, or you wouldn't have put this in place. So it's just something to think about. The master planning is great, but you have to be able to execute, or you have a lot of paper.
What I
So
would
what's the
say,
sweet
though,
spot?
What I would say is though, is that Front Street, I was on that Front Street blueprint plan way back in the day. That got done, I mean, it wasn't that long ago, it was 2015, so we got that taken care of. And that really was the impetus that started the development, even though there was a master plan. I think it depends on where we're at in time, and if I can
Yes.
keep this council in place for another 10 years, I mean, I think we can get it done. And we've never done a master plan. I get your point, but one of the things that I find most frustrating about this community in totality is there is no vision. There's absolutely no combined vision. And if we had that, we wouldn't be in the situations where do we put this or where do we put that? Who do we want to be? Do we want to be industry? Do we want to have, be totally, sorry, this is like I'm getting on my, soapbox here, but I really think that a master plan for this area would be important.
I already had my soapbox, I'll share.
Go ahead. Yeah, true.
Well, where is the sweet spot then? You're saying take some baby steps?
That would be my recommendation, just as a planner.
Something to relax a little bit, this overlay?
Yes,
area?
and give recognition of the fact that this is a special area by moving these boundaries. But that's my professional opinion. I think that if there is an interest in doing a master plan, it would be important for you to budget a good amount of money to do that. Just somebody that could be dedicated to it, because you could not have that done in-house. It's too much work. It's just too much work. So
Well, I know what I see for Empire as I drive down Newmark, and it's not necessarily what we have right there right now. There's so much potential for that area.
well, some of your design assistance team members weighed in on this, and if we could jump to that slide. I appreciate you doing this, Melissa. Thank you. I heard first from Andrew Licati from your design assistance team. He's an architect. And I'm not going to read this whole thing, but I think the bottom line is the sense that 1800 style is too restrictive, and we should really celebrate what's there already and build on it. The idea that you have to spend a lot of money to make things look good, I think we can get away from that idea. And that's pretty much what he's indicated in his comments here. Team members Kariva and Lucier weighed in as well. And she said, since the guidelines in place are not working, I support the premise that a revision would be in order. No guidelines at all is not a good option. I would support loosening the requirements, not eliminating them. The next comment was about the boundaries and supporting the idea of just looking at revisions to the guidelines. And then I heard from the chair of the Planning Commission. I have it here as the DAT, but she's with the Planning Commission, who was kind of in concert with these other comments as well. So they expressed some interest, although this is not representative of all the Planning Commission or all the design assistance team. So the next set of slides just really goes through, probably the next 4 or 5 pages goes through what these revisions talk about. And I don't want to belabor that because you have it in your packet, but I think that you can see that they're much shorter than the original guidelines. I think that they are written in a way that if the Planning Commission, Design Assistance Team, and I would like to get an architect or two to look at them, if the council's interested in going this direction, to see whether they could be refined to more accurately reflect land, architect speak. I'm a planner, I can give it a shot, but it's a draft. The processing for this, I'm anticipating with all the other stuff we have underway, we probably could not start it until probably this coming spring. I have a list here in your packet of all the things we have going on, and it's a fairly lengthy list. So if we want to do this justice, I would suggest that we look more towards springtime to get this started. So that's pretty much my comments, and I'm happy to answer any questions. If you want to make a decision tonight to go with one way or another, or do nothing, that's certainly your prerogative to kind of start to move towards consensus. But otherwise, I think there's a few things you could still talk about on this, and I'm happy to take any direction.
So what happened to John Morgan's recommendations?
You mean the actual report?
Yeah, I mean, he had some guidelines that he suggested, right?
No, he gave some suggestions as to keep it or remove it. And his suggestion was to remove it.
Completely?
As I recall, it's been a number of years ago since he made that. I really think, if you're going to ask my opinion, I think you should go ahead and have the Planning Commission review it and consider, maybe even give direction to Carolyn that you want some changes, you want it lessened, and you'd like to get their recommendations. The original ones, and most of your land use does go through your Planning Commission, so that is their role, to give you those recommendations and bring it back for feedback.
You know, I personally like to see what John Morgan stated. I mean, because we paid money for this, and this guy's an expert in this field. I mean, he also talked about sisters working there, but if it's not a developing area, then it can be restrictive. I'm not saying that we eliminate them all, but I think we should take his, we paid for this report, maybe look at it, or have the Planning Commission look at it at least.
I agree with Rogers.
Yeah, as far as what,
Sending it back to.
I agree with that too. We got to do something.
Sounds good to me.
But speaking of master plans, Roger, since Carolyn brought it up, I know it's a goal, and I agree that the staff doesn't have time to do that. So do we have that budgeted for this year?
Well, no. It's not budgeted for this year, and I'd be cautious, since one of your next topics is going to be talking about streets, and part of those street projects are an Empire project out there, plus you have a roundabout project that's coming up, and we're using funds for the library. So we're getting pretty tight for an Empire this year.
Well, if there were funds that we could find, I don't know if we have to use urban renewal district funds, I would encourage the council to think about that, because I think, to Stephanie's point, I think, yeah, there's a happy medium, but I do think that having that plan will be better served to make better decisions for the entire district.
So how much is a master plan going to cost for Empire?
The last design plan I worked on in another area was about $50,000. There's a lot of community engagement that is involved in these, and these days, with everything being so remote, it's even more intense. There's surveys, there's stakeholder interviews. You've both went through the process of the HNA and the Front Street master plan. So there's a lot that goes into it. Yeah.
Yeah, and that master plan just for Front Street was $150,000, right? We got a grant.
The TGM grant is $175,000.
Yeah, it was a lot.
Yeah. So I mean, it depends what you want the master plan to include. If you want it to be a general overlay, that's one thing. If you want to get into specifics, and, you know, where you want this and where you want that and regulate it.
Yeah, I want to do it right. So if
Well, I
it's
know, but I think a
$150,000,
master plan is, there's another discussion, and tell me if I'm wrong, it's up to what we want the master plan to entail. It can be very detailed, it can be very broad, it can encompass a lot. And so I think, if I understand the master plan that I've been involved with, it depends on where you want to be. So, I mean, and then and it can take years, depending on how detailed you want this or how involved you want.
I
Well-
don't disagree. I go back to vision. I will drive it home over and
Well,
over.
vision's
and over
great,
again.
but that's a general oversight then. We're not talking
No,
about a
I
detail.
completely disagree, Mr. Mayor. We had a vision for Front Street, and we have executed on that vision. We were very specific of what we wanted that to be, and that's one of our districts. I think Empire deserves the same amount of attention that we're giving Front Street.
I do.
And
But
that's my
but
point.
I'm just saying, 175 is what it was for Front Street. 50,000 is not going to make it for Empire unless we have to determine what we want this master plan to entail.
And all I would ask the council, I would encourage the council, if it can't be in this budget year, it needs to be in priority for the next budget cycle, is my point. Roger said that we're short on funds this year, and so that's really my point, because I don't think we do Empire. I think we do them a disjustice by not having this in place, and I know it will take years. I get it.
So does this council want to have a master plan for for Empire?
Can I just make one more point on that? I mean, we're talking about changing a boundary to not encompass an area where we have fencing and storage units, and I think that's the point you're trying to make. We can change a boundary, but if we have development there and we don't have a vision and we don't have what Carolyn is saying, then we are going to end up changing that boundary again, because we're going to have places already put in place. Empire is going to be developed, and I don't think it's that far down the road. I mean, we are in serious need of commercial development properties as well, and that point has been made when we were changing some stuff out in Empire. I'm just curious, have we heard from the Coalition of Empire? Because they have been very active, and I know before I got on council, when I was still doing news, they had some visioning that they had done for, you know, that area being a gateway to exactly what you're talking about, and they're pretty active. I wish Councilor Miles could weigh in on this, but.
You know, we have, as long as I've been on this council, we have listened to Empire, Coalition, or whatever groups out there, and try to accommodate whatever direction they wanted to go, because I felt, and the council felt, whatever they had a better idea and a direction of where they wanted to go. And this council has never been restricted, as long as I've been on this council, for anything to be developed in Empire. We've done nothing but try to benefit what Empire's wanted. Now, I'm asking, if this council wants to do a master plan for Empire, then I think we should state that and make sure that's an objection and a goal.
Well, I
We
think it
haven't had
already
that in
is
the
a goal,
past.
isn't it?
Pardon?
I think it already is the goal. That's why I thought we were with budget.
I think what you're talking about, though, is, and you don't want to lose, Mr. Mayor, is that we do have something that's too restrictive for that area.
Yes.
We need to make a move on that, but at the same time, we also need to have some visioning in place. And I asked earlier, what's the sweet spot? Where do we go? I think that's what we're looking for here. I think we need to have the review, and we need to start that process. And part of that process, I think, needs to be hearing from, you know, we don't need to get down into the weeds per se, but hear from them when we talk about something that's a little bit broader. Just my opinion.
I would agree with the idea of a master plan for Empire. Back not long after most of us got back on council, or Joe back to mayor, we did have that hearing out there with the local folk out in Empire, and they wanted roads. We gave roads, and my office is out there, so I talked to a lot of businesses down there throughout the week or over the course of time, and they don't know who I am half the time, but they tell me about how much they like the roads and how much they see getting done. I think it's funny, I've actually been noticed more in public for the Orca thing than I was after I got on council. But yeah, I hear from businesses down there. They appreciate what we're doing out there. They, people surprisingly love to see when the road's torn up so that they can see the mess that was underneath it. So yeah, I was just talking to a larger developer from farther north that does residential. They were asking me where they should look, and I told them Empire's the next boom. You should go there.
If I could just make a suggestion.
You sure you want to do that, Carolyn?
Yes, I do.
Pretty
I do. You're
passionate
on a
about this
roll,
one.
and I'm really excited to hear you be this excited about this. The bottom line is, you have been looking at public improvements in Empire for some time. You put in that whole area that gets you into the upper level of Holloway Place. You have put in streetscape improvements. That's a huge feature of any blueprint or master plan. You have put in zoning to identify and maximize commercial development in that area and to maximize density in the residential portions of the area as well. Design, you're dealing with this old design set. Streetscape, you've installed those lovely lights. I don't know so much about benches and trash cans and that kind of thing. All of those things comprise ultimately pretty much what you're doing on Front Street now is a blueprint. You've had, engagement with the public when you updated the zoning down there. I'm sure that when you did those improvements on South Empire, you had the public weigh in on those improvements as well. So it just appears from the outside that some of the things you want for that area, you have achieved. What I see missing is, the design piece of it. If you did want to do a plan, I think your comment, Mayor, is pretty good. What does that look like? What's the flavor? Is it a full-on master plan, like what you did back in the 80s and 90s with the Front Street Master Plan? Or is it more of a blueprint where you're getting down now into the weeds of certain specific things? So for whatever that's worth for your conversation, you're welcome to it. But it would really be nice to see something happening there. You have a whole entire waterfront to the north and south of Hollering Place. It's just a gem. It's just amazing. And you could wrap that into it as well. But that feeds then again into your Hollering Place notation in your goal. So I could blather on and on. But thank you for the opportunity. And if you're...
So you're going to take this back to the planning commission, and is what the consensus of the council, correct?
I'm waiting for that consensus.
I
I'm
think
hearing
that's
two
what
different
it is.
things.
Yeah, I took it off the rails again because I went back to the master plan, so. But what I've heard is there consensus on a master plan, Mr. Mayor?
I'm not in favor of a master plan. No. I mean, 1996, you said, was the Front Street plan? I mean, it just, and I agree with you,
No,
Carolyn.
that
I
was
actually,
it.
when I
Yeah.
first moved to Coos, I lived on Empire Boulevard in a somewhat sketchy house. And it has, I mean, the development that's happened in the 8 years that I've lived here, to your point, Carolyn, has been incredible. We didn't have sidewalks when I lived there. We didn't have the street posts. And we didn't have the beautiful landing place at Hollering Place. I mean, I think there's been quite a bit and quite a bit more that's done. I'm not in favor of the 1800s thematic building design either, but I agree with you that there should be something in place.
I think the confusion on the master plan, Carolyn, is, and I think that's the point I was trying to make, is what we want that to entail. And in my opinion, or my understanding, it can be very detailed to very broad, and everything in between. Am I correct?
Yes.
It's the scope of what this council would want, or the planning commission might suggest. And I think that a general scope with a master plan is one thing, but a detailed master plan, like we went through in Empire prior, I think is not beneficial. That's my opinion.
When
So-
you say prior, Mr. Mayor,
Huh?
are you talking about the Hollering Place? Is that what you're
No, I'm
talking
talking about the whole thing, but when we, because I think, didn't we do a master
We've
plan?
never done a master plan.
I mean, what did we do back when we did the urban renewal back there? I mean, it was very detailed.
Well, you did come up with a plan because that's, urban renewal, you have to establish what your plan is and what your goals are and what you hope to accomplish with urban renewal. So you do have that plan. And then, of course, you did go through a process, and I'm going to guess that that plan was already in place when you came up with the design standards. One would hope that they somewhat were together.
They were
although I
together.
can't-
They were
can't
almost
confirm that.
enacted together. Or were enacted together. So that's what I was referring to with sentence. So the point being is, I mean, we just need to, that was so detailed and that we have it. But I think that if we do a master plan, if that, and maybe get maybe a recommendation from the planning commission, we need to decide what the scope would be.
I think probably, and we don't have a full complement of council, and I didn't mean to take it off the rails, and I think we should just bring it back at another work session so that we're not, I don't think it's necessary to talk about it when we're just, you know what I mean? And I know I'm the one who did it, but maybe we can bring it back with the full complement of council members and talk through really what that looks like.
Well, and I think it would
Well,
depend on what the scope would be.
Yeah.
That's going to make a difference on, where the council is going to go.
And it's
gives
not
them-
that,
Yeah,
it's
and
not
it
that
gives
I'm
them an
not
idea.
of a vision, right?
Yeah.
Like, to your point, like, that's a good thing to have, but
Right.
I mean, I've been parts of lots of community plans and community assessments and housing studies that cost lots of money, and they just sit on a shelf.
Right.
So I'm kind of hearing that you'd like to table this for a little while and talk about it at a future
You
work
mean the
session?
master plan or the?
The
other?
No,
master
the
plan is
discussion
what-
about the master plan with the rest of the council. Is that
Well, I
what
think
you're-
that's great, but I also think that it would depend on the scope. And personally, if we're having the planning commission weigh in on the standards that we're suggesting here, I would also have them give us a recommendation on the master plan, if that's something within their capabilities, and maybe a scope and some ideas, and kind of we'd be able to focus on that, at least. What do you think?
I
Well,
just don't want to confuse the 2 points, that's
Right,
all.
no, I think they can be separate, but.
I just wanted to make one more point, because I think it maybe is just important to me, but one of the difficulties that, say, maybe the downtown association had is when, okay, let's just say in a group, let me go, if you change 1 or 2 people in a group, you can completely change the demographic entirely of that whole group. I've seen it happen, I've witnessed it. Same thing can happen in planning a downtown or an empire. Changing one business in a key location can change that entirely. So what makes it difficult for the groups that are operating to try and improve that area in that area is they need this structure from the city. They need that, that structure that's provided in code, but also in a plan, so that they can also assist in that. And we saw changes in downtown, probably 25, back in Cindy Miller days. That started to change, and we have an entirely different looking downtown core than we did back then. So I think it's important where we're at with this when we talk about visioning and planning. But again, I think we have too restrictive of development code out there, and we need to deal with that almost immediately.
It's clear.
I agree,
to me,
Stephanie.
Carolyn, so,
Herman, what did you want to say?
I just said that Stephanie, Councilor Kilmer's comments were spot on for what I'm feeling. I think that we do need to have that vision, but we are a little bit restrictive. So threading that line is where I'm at. I don't know how that looks, but thank you, Stephanie. You put it really well.
Well, maybe what I could do, you begin working on budgets whenever you, very soon. But what I can do is get this back to the planning commission maybe Marchish instead of, May, and ask them these questions. And what I'm going to share with them is kind of a chronology of everything that's gone on in the area. And I think that will help them. So that I can I think that would work. Does that sound agreeable?
Yeah, as long as if the council does decide, that would give us enough time to budget appropriately, depending on the scope of this plan. If it's called a master plan, if it's called a blueprint, whatever we decide to do.
Yeah, and I think that I'd like to look into some opportunities, some design assistance opportunities that may be out there. One of the tribes was successful in getting an NEA grant for an arts and culture master plan for that whole area, but they since dropped it because of just different things inside their own group. So there may be some opportunities out there. So I think I have the direction I need. Roger, is there anything I missed? Okay.
All right, thanks.
Thank you for your time.
Roger's like, okay, let's just move on. Next.
I miss Jennifer.
All right, next item, discussion regarding the fats, oils, and grease, the FOG program. Welcome back, everyone. Good seeing you guys. You got it all settled out for us, right? I can tell by this report.
Alrighty. We're gonna try to be short and sweet here. So this is just to give you some feedback of what we've talked about with the public and what we've received. So we had some public meetings, we had 6 of them. We sent out a notice and a survey to fill out to 131 through the postal service, and then we additionally emailed 98 of those if we had their emails. We also did Friday updates, and we had a wonderful group of 6 people show up for the total 6 meetings. And one person did call and say that they couldn't attend. So that was our public meeting thing. So we'll go into some comments in a few minutes. The survey results, we had 23 surveys returned. 5 of those were deemed not applicable to follow the program. We created the mailing list based off of the business licenses. So if they registered that they sold food, that triggered something. But some of them were like Pepsi products. So they are just a distribution center. So they distribute the food, but they don't actually sell. No one's going there and they aren't cooking anything. So that's where 5 of those came from. Of those 23, 7 had nothing. No grease trap, no grease interceptor. Of those, 43% had an interior grease trap, which is under the sink. It can be this big or this big, it just depends. 9% had exterior grease interceptors that are underground in much larger capacities. 26% had waste recycle storage dumpsters or drums. And 22% recycled their cooking oil through a drum or another device. 43% of the total utilized professional pumpers, but 57% did not. So that leads us into some public comments. One of them was, will there be a program to help with costs? And you guys had mentioned that you wanted to implement some kind of program for that. So we talked with them about that and how we're working on creation of the program and what that would look like and the logistics of it. Then there were also people that had comments of why would the city be using money to help owners when they didn't have the financial assistance when they had to go through and install all of these things. Didn't really have an explanation for that, but we said that at this time, council was looking at bringing everyone up to the same standard. And to do that, we thought that a program would be helpful, but that we would take those concerns to you all. They also asked if there would be any additional fees for the FOG program as a whole, and the answer to that is, at this time, no, because we're utilizing wastewater user rates, and the high usage rate payers will help pay for this. A majority of them did not want to have to pay a professional pumper. As they do it now on their own, they have contracts with Less Sanitary to take their buckets down to them. So a lot of them did not want that additional cost. So we'll be looking for some guidance on how you want us to handle that. And then there were some, like, is there any way to reduce the rates on taxes that they pay? And I said, I don't think so. Unfortunately, you still have to pay your property taxes. Will training materials be provided? They will be. We're working on some templates for them to utilize, so that way they have a clear understanding of what we're looking for. We also created a guideline for kitchen best management practices to kind of lay out what they would need to do to meet those standards. And we've gotten a couple that say that their food service establishment doesn't put grease into the system, so they should not comply. So we're working on some more education to let them know that it's not just grease. There can be other food particles that cause problems, hence the fats, oils, and grease. So we're working on that, and that is what I have. Do
So
you guys
you
have
mailed out
questions?
131. Is that because there's 131 facilities you felt that were impacted by the FOG program?
Yes,
And we still believe that to be the case?
yes,
So,
Minus the 5.
minus the 5.
okay, so and then you got 23 out of the survey, 7 establishments had no grease trap. If we took that percentage, which is around 20%, maybe a little bit more, and you did that, it means we have like 26 facilities out there probably not using a grease trap? Right?
If
I
you
mean,
take
we could
that-
probably
yeah.
come to some conclusion, whatever. So that would be a huge impact on this city and our wastewater. I guess my point to me is that I think we still need to head down this road. And the ones that are doing their own, 57% taking care of their own waste, what are they doing with that waste?
So they they have these special buckets, and they scoop it out and they put it in the buckets, and they have lids, and then once the buckets are full, they take them down to Lesis Sanitary, and they dispose of them that way.
You mean they're dumping in the garbage can, they're getting it at less sanitation?
They told me that they actually that they had to take them down there in order to,
So does less
There,
sanitation, they have a process that handle this?
that
That could
I'm
be a
not aware.
follow-up for,
I can
I-
definitely look into
I
that.
would be surprised if Lesis has a operation analyst. In my opinion, the way Lesis is getting this is in the dumpster. Or a lot of these others have, as you said, grease traps or barrels, dump barrels that they're dumping in it, and then it's being handled. That's the other option that's happening. And if that's the case, that's fine. The only thing is that, in my opinion, that if they don't do this or we don't establish this, then we need to establish something that we know, an inspection that's being done on a regular basis, because if not, we're going to have the same problem that we're having now. And so, in my opinion, I still believe that we should, and Carmen's on board, we should still have a professional pumper that can get us the data and give us the information and show us. And the consultant that we had here last time, and I know we're talking Orange County, I believe she was referencing, but the impact, the positive impact it had on that community down there was huge. And I think that we could find something similar if we followed that criteria, which saves not just, it saves the whole community and citizens money in trying to upgrade this system. I mean, we just put 25 million in Empire. We're looking at probably the same amount of money in downtown Coos Bay. And we're not even talking our I&I, our lines that need to be taken care of and maintained, which is a huge expense. So,
Okay. And we have a request for qualifications out right now for a preferred pumping list, so that we could create that list to give to people to help them facilitate who to contract with. So if we're still, we can definitely continue down that path. And
well, that's my opinion. And I mean, you know, and it would even save these establishments money down the road if we don't have to keep putting, if we can cut our costs of maintenance and improvements in our wastewater. Carmen, you want to chime in?
I'm still on board with having a third party deal with this. We just don't know what's happening to the refuse when people are dealing it on their own, or if it's being dealt with on a regular basis. I think it's just responsible to have a third party that kind of reports to us. And I just recently had my grease traps cleaned, and I upped my frequency. And it is about $100 every time they come out. which, you know, if you're doing it every 3 months, which is kind of standard, that's not a huge amount for a restaurant, but that's my opinion. It might be for some, but you know, we're a higher volume, so we're going to be doing it more like every 6 weeks, and that will have an extra cost, but it'll be, I think, better for us in the long run, knowing that our lateral won't get clogged, and then it won't have issues down the line that will cause clogs and backups that will ultimately affect our business in general. The downtown area, if you have an issue with a clogged lateral or main line, it can wreak havoc with your plumbing systems. I know we've had issues in the past, and it was not fun. So I think that this is not an unreasonable ask for the major contributors to the issue to deal with. That's just my opinion.
I don't think the survey was intended to change our original decision. I think it was really a fact-finding mission for us to see how many businesses were doing this and how they were doing it. So quite honestly, for me, it doesn't change my mind at all. I'm really grateful for the information, and it's spelled out really clearly, and I think we just carry on, and now we have a bit more information at hand.
I agree.
Sounds great. I would
Anyone
also
else?
say that everyone that did attend had no problem with following the program. It was just how they were going to implement
Sure.
it. They understood that they own the lateral up to including the connection and how it can be detrimental to their business. So,
Great.
And I think for me, appreciate all the time and effort that went into getting to folks and giving them an opportunity to come forward. I mean, we're at about 18% of the surveys that were actual surveys that, you know, when we take those 5 off, that got returned or attended. And that's a pretty low number for something that could be impacting. But I don't feel, I mean, I am with everyone else. I think we need to move forward with this program because it does have a huge impact on all of the citizens, but it creates an opportunity to educate. But I think we did our due diligence in giving people an opportunity to have input on this and also help us structure this program. And that's what was more important to me, was that they had an opportunity to help, to have input so that we could structure it so that it would work. And we didn't get as many people as I had hoped for. That's
and we
disappointing.
do plan on coming back in mid-January for the final approval of the program.
Well, I
and
think
adoption.
you and all of the staff have done a great job of creating an opportunity. I'm not faulting that at all. I'm putting that on the shoulders of the business owners who had the opportunity and didn't take advantage of it.
Yep. Good job. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Would there be any consideration for basing the requiring something based on the size of a place and their volume? For example, you know, there's a store that has just a little hot dog roller, you know, and that's about all they do is sell 10 or 20 hot dogs, so that their volume would be quite a bit smaller.
Do they have a grease trap?
What was that?
Do they have a grease trap?
They might not, but I mean, they should. So would you require that they have a grease trap?
I would, and the only reason is that, as Carmen just suggested, the frequency is going to determine on the establishment. So this hot dog place, they show up, and also if and we're going to set criteria, in my opinion, and I really don't want to see staff get involved. So if we can have the professionals do it, they'll regulate it for us and turn in the information. So maybe it's only once every year, or maybe it's every 2 years it needs to be done. I mean, the frequency will be determined on kind of volume and grease they determine and dump into this facility. And that's the other thing. If you do this yourself or do it yourself, you're not going to regulate when it needs to be done. You're just going to say, oh, I probably should check it. And I know from experience, because I did it myself, you know, before I had someone else coming in. And then, you know, but with them coming in, they'd say, no, we need it up, but your frequency needs to be more, your volume is more, and then, okay, we can cut down, it's winter time, and they would keep us on track. So I personally think we should make it, everyone needs to go through it.
Well, and I think you need consistency. you gotta have something in place because you don't wanna have people, I mean, business owners talk. And you don't want one guy saying, well, I didn't have to do it. Because I only sell, hot dogs.
Yeah, if they have a grease trap, then I think we need to continue on with it.
And then the other one is, do you have any thought as far as providing funding or helping with the funding as far as an amount or a total amount to the system we would want to be providing?
I feel like we should leave that up to Roger. I thought Roger was looking at some funding sources on what the average cost was.
I'll bring you something back, but I think we limited our funding to implementation of, or updating the grease traps.
Right.
It wasn't an ongoing,
No, I think there's a cost associated with doing business if you have to have a grease trap in a food establishment, And unfortunately, they're right. I mean, there's some that are out there because they just, it's gotten over, at the time, it wasn't code, and the restaurant sold, and they just continue on without a grease trap. Or they're operating the grease trap. I can't even imagine how many old ones we probably have out there. And when we start looking into them, I imagine there's a percentage that probably need to be replaced because they're out of date, and they're not going to maintain the service that we need to have maintained.
And for the funding program, would we want to create like a cap of so many dollars per year? That way we could budget accordingly, or?
I'll get with you on it.
Okay, perfect. Well, thanks.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Thank you. And appreciate the businesses that did show up too. I think
Yeah,
it's
really.
fun.
Update on the tow company of record process. Is it Chief or Roger, are you going to handle this?
I'll take it. Good evening. The Coos Bay Police Department would like to continue our discussion regarding the tow company of record, which is a model that is used by many municipalities and counties across the state of Oregon, to include our local county, Coos County. At the September 28th work session, this topic was discussed, and at the conclusion of the discussion, it was decided that we were going to move forward to a request for quote process. A request for quote and qualifications was crafted, and the local tow companies were given an opportunity to provide quotes to be considered. A total of 4 proposals were received and evaluated. Since the RFQ process started and the tow companies were first notified of the possible change, staff did start receiving multiple phone calls and from the tow companies and owners expressing their concerns and requesting an opportunity to voice their concerns in a public meeting. The tow company owners were advised that the decision would be made at a public council meeting. Several of the companies stated that they had recently purchased new equipment to make them more efficient and even have hired additional staff members and drivers. Staff had scheduled on-site visits of the tow companies to better evaluate them, as well as we were going to use each proposal submitted by using the scoring criteria identified in the RFQ that they all were made aware of. Last Wednesday and Thursday, staff did visit all 4 companies, and we were given a tour of their facilities to include their equipment, storage areas, security systems if they had them, and etc. At the conclusion of the on-site visit, and in the addition to the material that each company provided in their respective quotes, a scoring process was conducted using a scoring matrix outlined in the RFQ. There was 5 main categories that they were scored by, and the first one was price and completeness of fee schedule for all anticipated services. The second was the willingness and the ability to meet the scope and work service required. The third would be their response time. The fourth was the ability to tow all vehicles, regardless of their size, condition, or location. And the fifth was the ability to secure all vehicles and other property. That kind of came into place even more of a factor once House Bill 3124 came in effect. Each category held a weighted percentage for a total of 100 points, or 100%. Here's how the breakdown went. Mass Brothers scored a percentage total score of 98%. North Bend Towing scored 85%. Pro Towing scored a 75%, and Expert Towing scored a 65%. All of these companies expressed their desire to be considered as a towing company for the city of Coos Bay, and during our on-site visit, all shared improvement ideas for their companies in areas of expanding on equipment, storage areas, and additional personnel. However, the scores were based off of what's available currently. In addition, all companies were required to show proof of insurance at a level of coverage spelled out in the RFQ. If it is the council's desire to select one company of record for the city of Coos Bay, Mass Brothers outscored all the other companies and would be the company of choice. If council decides to continue using a rotation type process, then it would be the suggestion of staff to impose a much higher penalty for the companies that were not able to follow the outlined, or the requirements outlined in the RFP. And staff could bring back some of those, some recommendations on potential penalties if you did choose to go that direction. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
So are you suggesting a rotation?
I'm not suggesting a rotation. I think that's what kind of brought us into this discussion to begin with. I'm simply saying if we decide to go back down the road of a rotation, then I think that we have to have some stricter penalties, or else we may end up right back where we're at again. And the biggest issue that we have faced in the past, and what brought us to us discussing this, is the amount of time that it takes for us to continue to work through a rotation and be denied tows.
Were you imagining this would be like a 2-year contract that would come up for bid every 2 years, or what? Do you have any thoughts on that?
So I actually, you said 2 years, and that was actually what I was kind of considering as well. I was considering to propose is, I think that if we choose to do a single tow company of record, we do limit that contract to maybe 24 months. That allows other businesses to get to reapply again, throw their name in the hat again, and also some of the ideas that were proposed to us at the on-site visits, they're good ideas, and they want to expand their business, they want to build their business, and this would give them an opportunity to get back in the in the ring at least.
Thank you.
Anything else, council? Roger, comment?
Was
Suggestion?
there only concern that this be done in a public session, or did they have concerns about considering one versus multiple?
Their concerns from a couple of the company owners was that if the city of Coos Bay decided to go with one tow company of record, they would obviously lose out on the city tows, and they were concerned about that. So they would like to express their desire to remain on at a rotation type of call out.
But not all of them from at least the scoring that I see here are going to be able to meet the qualifications, am I correct?
Well, and all there wasn't an automatic disqualifier on the 5 categories. They were scored and they were all weighted. And definitely some of the tow companies they were marked down in certain categories for their inability to, for instance, if we have a situation where we have to tow a vehicle for a search warrant, we have to be able to keep a chain of custody on that vehicle, and that vehicle needs to be towed to a secure location where we know people aren't going to be around it and potentially tampering with the evidence. And some of them fell in that category. The areas that they had for us to be able to tow the vehicles, or for them to tow the vehicles to, were I wouldn't consider, in my estimation, wouldn't be secured. Some of the other issues, some of the companies weren't able to tow vehicles after a certain length or a certain weight. And remember, if it's a tow company of record, we're going to utilize them for all of our tows, not only just out in the public, but for city fleet as well. And so some of our questions was, are you able to tow pump trucks, sanding trucks, street sweepers, fire trucks, those kind of larger trucks, and some of them weren't able to, so then they would be marked down in that area.
So were they made aware of where they fell percentage-wise?
I have not circled back around to them. I actually have been working with the companies up to even this morning. I've been dealing with some emails and whatnot, and
A
so
little busy.
I was actually collecting the last little bit of information from some of them, and so my thought is and plan is to if we do end up going down the road of only having one, then given an opportunity for the other companies to come and sit down and maybe discuss where they would need to kind of, improve in their areas.
Okay, I kind of feel like we need to make a move, and we were in a situation before that brought this to the table. But I like the idea of that opportunity to come back, but I think they need information where they were short a little bit on that evaluation, so that they have that opportunity to address that in the next couple of years if they want to come back, and that was my own point.
Yeah, and I think part of this that drove this was the part of the way they reacted. And there's only one tow company, if I understand correctly, Chief, and let me know if I'm incorrect, that always responded, always had trucks available, always had storage, and always towed RVs and disposed of the vehicles. All the rest have found reasons not to do these things, which caused the one company to have to pick up and respond and do it. Am I correct?
That is correct.
Roger?
So, a couple things. Chief did contact all the tow companies and advised them you would be talking about this time. So, and they were given an opportunity to be here. I think, at least my understanding is that they do want to have their voice heard, but it might be at the next meeting when it's discussed.
Well, they may be online, we don't know.
True. Secondly, I would be remiss if I didn't share with you that former Chief McCullough was on me for more than 10 years to go this direction. And for the very same reasons we're looking at it now. The county has gone to this. I would say that the difference for what being proposed here is we're suggesting a 2-year contract where the county went to 7.
A 7?
Yes.
Wow.
But I think a 2-year is the right amount of time. And I would also share that at least in the 80s, this was done this very way. And they just got away from it to go to the rotation. And sometimes we just have to rethink how we're doing business when the way we're doing business no longer works for us.
Right.
But the reality is we're not trying to limit business for those tow companies. We're trying to conduct the business of the city in the most efficient way we can, and this is not the most efficient way.
Council feel all right about everyone? Carmen, you feel comfortable with this?
There you go. Yeah. Yes, I do. I think that it's a matter of public safety as well, that we just go with the route that's working the best for the city in general. Having the dispatchers being tied up, going through a list and having to restart the process of finding a tow over and over and over again, I would imagine on a pretty regular basis, doesn't make sense to me. So I think going with the original direction that we were thinking sounds good.
Thanks. Okay, Chief, thank you so much for the report and contacting all these and doing the inspection and getting back to us.
You're welcome. And I think we'll end up bringing it back to you on December 7th for your final decision.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, discussion regarding proposed 2022 spring streets And Greg, you're going to handle it.
They are.
Welcome.
How are you guys? Thank you for having me. I think this is a pretty good opportunity to make some much needed improvements throughout several different areas of the cities. First of all, in an effort to go ahead and complete some of the goals set forth by council, city staff has identified several streets to be completed for the upcoming spring streets projects. 7 streets have been identified. North Wasson, between Newmark and Shetter Avenue, Michigan Avenue between South Cammon Street and Empire Boulevard, LeClaire between Ocean Boulevard and Newmark, North 14th between Myrtle and Nutwood, Anderson between Broadway and Bayshore, Central Avenue between 11th and Ocean Boulevard, and Alder between Broadway and Bayshore. So staff right now is recommending that we solicit different engineering groups to come up with, to perform design, construction management, and estimates for these 7 streets. Alder is 65% designed. I know it says here, design is complete for Alder. However, that was a typo. Sorry about that. So if it pleases council, please provide direction as to whether we should move forward with these streets. I did go ahead and get with the help from Kelly Burnett in my office to put together a PowerPoint presentation for each street. North Wasson between Newmark and Shetter. This is a grind and inlay project with 4 new ADA compliant ramps to be done. The estimate for that project, staff's estimate for that is $153,000. So the next street, Michigan Avenue, south of Cammon, that's approximately 1,200 feet. 12 new ADA ramps to be installed for that, with an estimated cost of $445,000. The next street, LeClaire Street between Ocean Boulevard and Newmark. That's going to be more of a spot road bed repair plus a grind and overlay. That road, it does have some problems, but I think we can do some spot fixes that's going to create a much more cost benefit for the city. The next street, North 14th, between Myrtle and Nutwood, that road is going to be a complete reconstruction, along with, oh gosh, I think 6 ADA compliant ramps there. The next street, Anderson, between Broadway and Bayshore, that is going to be a grind and overlay of about 115 feet by 40 with new striping, and the estimate there is about $72,000. The next street, Central Avenue between 11th and Ocean, that's going to be the grind and overlay of approximately 950 feet, and staff is estimating that the cost for that is going to be $80,000, and that's actually going to be a continuation of a project that was done a couple years ago. We're just going to continue it on up the road. I think that'll be a great asset for the city. And finally, Alder between Broadway and Bayshore. That project will consist of a grind and overlay of 180 feet, 2 ADA compliant ramps, and a new sidewalk along the north side of Alder. And I think that's part of that front street blueprint as we're moving forward, is for pedestrian connectivity through that area. So with that, the funding for this is transportation dollars, transportation utility fund dollars will fund LeClaire, 14th, Anderson, Central Avenue, and that estimate for those roads is $1,109,000. The downtown urban renewal will fund the Alder project for $225,000, and the Empire urban renewal will fund the North Wasson and Michigan projects, kind of tying into that earlier discussion about the Empire area of making those improvements there. So the total cost of all of these proposals is $1,932,000.
Looks good.
That's a lot. I know it's a lot.
I know. But so,
Well, I think for what the lineage you're taking care of, that's pretty darn good. And I
Yes.
gotta tell you, I think the one I hear the most about is Central, and I think that people are gonna be pretty excited about that. I've had a few of those
Yes, yes.
majors on that.
so Greg, just for the public's knowledge, there's a process that we go through to choose these streets, right? I mean,
Correct.
And that's what we've done all along, right?
Yes, yes. So that's the pavement condition survey. And I do have in here, I didn't publish it, but I can provide it, kind of the average PCI numbers for each one of those roads. And they're all on the lower end of that PCI report and in the greatest need of being improved. One of the things that we do look at is maintenance versus replacement. Some of these roads are more keen to be maintained versus replaced. And that also includes or improves the shelf life, if you will, or the usability of a road. The better we can maintain them, the longer they last. And the dollars get smaller and smaller for that maintenance versus the overall replacement.
So we're still on a catch-up plan to try to get where we need to be, right? On a maintenance plan.
Yeah, and that's going to be kind of a constant because it is aware. It is designed to fail over the life of its. That's what the job of the road is to,
Right.
save the subgrade. But sometimes the subgrade gets old and needs to be replaced, and that's what's happening over, say, on 14th. Is
Right.
that we're having to replace that. But we have other areas where we do have road that can be salvaged, and that's what we want to do.
Great, Councilor Miles isn't here, and he always asks about Coos Bay Boulevard. Could you give us an update on Coos Bay Boulevard?
Yeah, so actually, the last slide there, I apologize. We are going to be looking at Coos Bay Boulevard. Probably in the springtime, we're going to look at design for making those improvements on Coos Bay Boulevard. It is important, and we need to get it done. Just trying to get the schedule in line for it. So hopefully in the summertime.
So I can give you a little bit of update. Nicole has been working on the financing side of that project, and we made a decision earlier today between two banks. We're moving towards going with U.S. Bank for a loan. I think the difficult part is both banks are requiring a little bit more work from our bond counsel, which is probably going to cost us around $15,000 or $12,000 to $15,000. But we are working through that right now, and it appears we have a fairly decent rate from U.S. Bank for the project. Our big concern right now is how much is it really going to cost versus what we're trying to get a loan for right now.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, I think with Coos Bay Boulevard, there's a lot of unknowns there.
but in reality, I mean, you're looking at spending nearly $2 million there, and when you add Coos Bay Boulevard, you're actually pretty close to 3.8.
Thank you, Roger. Thank you, Greg.
Yeah, thank you. And
I had one more question.
Sure.
I spoke about Central Avenue, and we're talking about the lanes that are going up the hill. I think we may take some heat, though, for not looking at the lanes coming down the hill, because I've seen cars dodging big. And I don't know if there's some way to put something into that side of the street as well, or maybe take a look at it and see,
That might be your fall project.
Sure, yeah.
It's probably a bigger one,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
We may need a little PR on it then.
Yeah,
Because
the
it
nice thing about the way this is set up, you're actually doing projects in your springtime, and then you're doing projects in your fall.
Yeah.
And half the time they blend into each other, so it almost seems like you're doing road projects year-round almost now.
So, and staff, I want to thank you, but you made a huge dent into some things that we've needed to be done and continue on to fix our roads and streets, which has been the goal of this council from day one. So, thank you.
All right, thank
Yep.
you.
Thank you.
All right, council, anything else? Well, I think we covered quite a bit.
I wanted to thank the staff for this long meeting. I know I went on a tangent, and so just really appreciate the staff, and I'm glad we had the conversation, but I would like to thank everyone for staying later than normal on a work session.
It's good to have you here. You keep us on our toes, Lucinda.
I'd like to suggest that we start looking at how we can make an expansion of the growth boundary happen, or the possibility of annexing something near us. I think we would have, based on the last housing needs assessment, they said we need about 80 acres to meet our housing demands for the next 20 years, and that we had 40 or 400 extra acres. I checked the housing needs analysis, and I goofed. That was not including the port property. They considered that unbuildable because a different governmental entity owns it. So if the port ever does anything with that, that would make it more complicated. I don't know the process for annexing something, but I think that would be our better bet. But I do want to expand the geographic bounds of the city somehow, because more is more. Don't know how we go about that.
Well, I think we wait for Carolyn to come back with some suggestions, and there's some others I've talked to that have been planners in the past here, and there's some ways that can be created to do that. It's just, finding a way to do it, and getting the county involved, and, the state and whatever. But we got LCOG looking into it, and I think that we need to wait for them to come back with a suggestion and recommendation. But it's definitely something that we need to do. And annexing is always an option, but it's not always an easy process, if I remember correctly. Nate's shaking his head. So,
Well,
It's
it
hard to
comes with
decide
a-
which one's
It
harder.
comes with a lot of responsibility, and usually that responsibility comes with a lot of cost. So,
Yeah. We choose between something that's got infrastructure or something that's probably owned by Weyerhaeuser already.
well, it has to be a willing participant, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
And you have to be able to, the only way that's going to happen is they want to see the benefit.
I want more at Cape Arago.
Huh?
I want more at Cape Arago.
Well, and I mean, it might be an option, but I'm not sure how we get there. I don't know. It's something we can look into, though. So.
didn't even thought about that. It's
But then
interesting.
I'm not sure how it affects Charleston's district, and, oh, whatever. Well,
I know it's a mess. I brought it
it
up.
is, it's a lot. There's a lot to it. Any other comments, Carmen? Anyone?
Not me at the moment. Good meeting, though. Lots of good discussions.
It was. And everyone have a happy Thanksgiving, and thanks again.
Yeah. Happy holidays.
Sarah, you're so quiet. I was so like.
Jesus.